Thank you, Ravi, for having us. And I'd like to thank both the Bangalore International Center and the IAS Association for hosting this event. And want to thank Vivek, who at very short notice agreed to change his schedule and come out to address us here. I believe we have about 160 registrations online and a few people here, which makes it really worthwhile. So the way we have thought of this format, I will speak for a few minutes on the topic of incremental to exponential. What are the kind of changes which are coming in the immediate 10 years, which will have a significant impact on our day-to-day lives? And then hand it over to Vivek, who will speak about his book. He's written 5 books, and he will talk about some of them. And after that, we'll engage in a chat about some of the ideas in his book. And then the second part will be on government. How are the ideas related to incremental to exponential? Are they applicable to government at all? Because government is a very different animal, as everyone knows. Can exponential technologies be used to make government more efficient and more effective indeed? So just to give you a sense of what is exponential, the human brain doesn't understand exponential very easily. If you were to take 30 steps, we all know where 30 steps will take us. We can count from here, where will 30 steps take us? But if you took 30 exponential steps, you would have actually taken 1 billion steps and would have circumvented the globe 20 times over. That is the power of exponentiality, which our brain doesn't normally understand. And Kurzweil of the Singularity University, who is also a collaborator with Vivek, says we're going to see the last 20,000 years of history, that is from the birth of agriculture to the birth of the internet, happen twice around in the next 100 years. Just think about it. 20,000 years of change are going to happen in the next 100 years, 2 times over, thanks to not just the acceleration of technologies, but also the convergence of about 15 to 20 technologies. And that's something which I think is, we are living in an era of remarkable change, which we haven't seen in the past. The other point I'd like to mention a couple of interesting nuggets. The mobile phone was one such moment, the iPhone in particular, which changed our whole conception of life in a phone. I mean, today, most of us can't do without our phones. I don't know how many of you know this. In 2007, I think it was June 29th, when the first iPhone was unveiled. Much of the invention in the iPhone was not done by the iPhone, by Apple. It was actually done by Nokia. The first mobile browser was done by Nokia. The second camera phone was done by Nokia. You can list the number of firsts which Nokia did, but was taken advantage of by Apple. The only thing Apple actually did was the haptic multi-touch in the 2007. The App Store, the first App Store was Nokia. It was not Apple, so it was not the iPhone. But yet, Apple created a platform business versus a product business, which was Nokia. And today, the iPhone is a $2 trillion business, which should tell you what are the kind of exponential changes which have happened and where further building on this are we leading to. I'd like to end by having a word about government. See, governments are, for those who have worked both in the government and in the private sector, those who succeed in the private sector do not usually succeed in government. Nandan Nilekani is a rare exception who walked the talk. He walked like a champ on both sides. But he was an exception which proved the rule. Governments are political. Accountability is to process than to outcomes. There's a lot of red tape. It's complex. So succeeding in government requires a far different DNA and leads to the well-known problems of what we all know and deal with in our day-to-day lives. Having said that, if you look at India today, after the post-COVID era, India has today emerged as the vaccination capital of the world. And this is no small measure due to the involvement of government. Also, we handled the outbreak of COVID in a country which is 1/4 the size of the US and 4 times the population. Our death rates were nowhere compared to what it was even in an advanced country like the US. We got our masks going, our medical supplies going, all in record time, largely due to the intervention of the government and IAS officers. However, we do fail when it comes to execution on many, many things. We are able to send the cheapest satellites to space thanks to our scientists at ISRO, but we are not able to cut a road properly. Or you can see now, Bangalore is dug up everywhere. So I want at some point in the conversation for Vivek to tell us how can technology solve some of these problems which emanate from the unique ecosystem of government. With these words, I'll hand it over to Vivek and request him to speak. Thank you.
Let me start off by giving you a perspective of what we can expect in this decade. Forget the next 100 years, 200 years. Let's talk about what's going to happen in this decade. Let's start with energy. I mean, right now, energy is important because India is polluted as possibly could be. India is importing diesel and oil, and it's dependent on foreign governments to run its economy because of energy, because of that dependence. If you look at the cost of solar energy, if you look at the cost of wind energy, it's been dropping exponentially for the last 50, 60 years or so. Worldwide, we've now crossed a threshold in which you're if you're buying a new house in most parts of the world, it's cheaper to harness sunlight than to be connected to the grid. In India, it's different because the rates are subsidized. There's a stupid system here in many places. But the fact is that overall, if you were now building a new house here, it would be cheaper for you to have solar panels and storage than to be buying from the grid. And you will get your returns within 3, 4, 5 years or so. So after that, it becomes free. The cost is continuing to drop exponentially. Move forward 3 or 4 or 5 years. The cost of solar and storage will be less than half of what it is right now. Move forward towards the end of the decade, it's going to be as cheap as mobile phone minutes are. Go back, 15, 20 years. I'm visiting here from the United States. If I had to call my family up in America, it would cost me a fortune over here, about $2, $3 a minute, and then you'd have to make trunk calls. And I remember the nightmares it would be to make phone calls from here. Now, the rickshaw drivers, the beggars practically have smartphones with WhatsApp. They can call anyone anywhere in the world and text anyone anywhere in the world, and it's almost free, right? So this is how energy is going to be by the end of this decade. That with the exponentially dropping prices of solar and wind, it's going to be almost free. That yes, you have to buy the smartphone, you have to buy the solar cells and the batteries, but once you've done that, it's practically free. What does this mean? It means that you have change like you've never seen in industry after industry after industry. Already there are a number of vehicles on the road which are electric, mostly for the rickshaw types of vehicles which are electric. Soon it won't make sense to have diesel trucks or to have fossil fuel internal combustion engine cars, because the cost of running electricity will be so cheap that it won't make economic sense. So you're going to have a glut of these old Marutis and all these Suzukis, all these old vehicles you have which run on petroleum. By the end of this decade, I'm talking about in the next 7, 8 years or so, dramatic change happens, and we flip a switch, and all the economics of the internal combustion engines go out the door. All right, and then you look at agriculture. Google what's happening with vertical farms. Vertical farms are essentially buildings in which you have LED lights and you're growing plants. Still very expensive. But the beauty of being able to grow in vertical farms is that you don't have to worry about pesticides. You consume, typically 5% of the water that you do in the farms right now. India is facing severe water shortages. There's no shortage of land. There's no shortage of people to grow crops. But that water shortage is a severe problem for India. And what's more, the crops here are filled with chemicals. They're polluted crops. I mean, the farmers are buying fertilizers, which are often subsidized. They're buying all sorts of horrible chemicals, and they're polluting the food you eat. I don't feel comfortable eating the fresh vegetables here because they probably have pesticides on them. In vertical farms, you grow them in a building, and you don't need pesticides because it's a closed building. Typically glass, so you have the sunlight coming as well as the LED lights. What happens when the cost of energy goes to zero? The economics suddenly flip again. That happens late in this decade. when it becomes cheaper to grow vertical food in buildings than in even farms in Bangalore or New Delhi, because of the cost of energy dropping and the cost of automation dropping, and because there are a lot of empty buildings around where you could be growing food. It's the same thing with meat. We can synthetically produce meat right now. You know, the first 3D printed hamburger cost about $300,000. Now you can buy 3D printed hamburgers for about $10. Um, Move forward at the exponential pace at which is advancing, you're down to about $1, down to about a few cents, which means even in India you'll be able to synthetically produce meat, which means you don't have to kill animals. Now, there's going to be a dilemma for Hindus or Muslims, because if you have a synthetically produced beef, which really didn't come from a cow, because you can essentially take the genome of a cow and replicate the meat, and there's no cow over there, or same thing with pork. Will you eat it? Well, that's a question you'll have to answer, because it really isn't, beef. Even though it tastes like beef, it smells like beef, and it looks like beef. That's all going to be economical in the next 5 or 7 years or so. So big dramatic change. And then the mess that you have with the roads over here. Imagine if you could get self-driving cars working on these roads. I live in Silicon Valley. When I get on Route 280, which is near my house, I put the car in autopilot and it drives itself for the next 20, 30 miles until the next exit. Soon, my Tesla will drive itself even on local roads. Elon has been promising that for the last 2 or 3 years. One of these days, Elon Musk will deliver what he promised, and that day will probably be in the next year or two. So they'll start working in the West, in countries such as Singapore, and then some of the newer roads will have self-driving cars there, and then God will probably intervene, and they'll start working in the gullies over here. But self-driving cars are going to start taking over our roads. So self-driving electric cars, which are cheaper than existing vehicles in this decade, start happening over here. And then the delivery services. Drones have become very cheap. So all of these, delivery services you have, imagine now if you could just click on your app and the food that you just ordered from the restaurant was droned over to your house in 5 or 10 minutes. Those are coming as well. Synthetic biology advancing exponentially. Not only can we now engineer human cells, we can engineer plants. Imagine having mango trees that grow in Rajasthan. Imagine having wheat that'll grow in in the Thar Desert, wherever. I mean, just imagine foods being adapted to the Indian landscape and becoming inexpensive. That's also possible in synthetic biology. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but you're talking about major, major changes happening within this decade. And the impacts of that are going to be on every industry you can imagine. I'm hard pressed to name one industry which won't be impacted. So Srivatsa wanted me to talk about my book, Incremental to Exponential. Incremental to Exponential is actually part 2 of Driving the Driverless Car. Driving the Driverless Car talks about all of the things I talked about. It talks about solving the grand challenges of humanity. It talks about now how we face dilemmas, because the same technology that can be used for good can be used for evil. I try to talk about the positive things over here. I could tell you about all the things that terrify me, and the list is as long as the things that are exciting. So in Driving the Driverless Car, I talked about all of these advances. Part 2 of it is from incremental to exponential, because a lot of you folks, especially in Bangalore, are in IT. A lot of the people listening to this are in government. So the question is, how do you now use these technologies to build new billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar industries? Well, he mentioned platforms. That's one thing. There are a whole number of techniques that Silicon Valley uses to build the most valuable companies in the world. The Chinese are experts at copying. They've copied everything they can from Silicon Valley. The Indians are a little bit dumb in that area, that you still think that copying and stealing technology is a bad thing. Mostly because the Americans, they've been lecturing you, saying, no, don't steal technology, it's bad for you, do your own R&D. Complete BS. Silicon Valley thrives on stealing. Every major tech company, Apple, okay, everything Apple has is stolen from somewhere else. Facebook is a master of theft. I mean, right now they're trying to copy Clubhouse. In fact, all the major tech companies are trying to copy, the last big fad. All Silicon Valley does is copy. So that's another lesson that India doesn't have to spend massively on R&D or do any of the things that they're being lectured at by the American ambassador and the Americans. Copy and steal everything you can and adapt it to the local environment, build platforms, and then use new innovation methods. We can go on and on and on about innovation methods, but the same lessons apply to government. What you wanted me to talk about was government. Well, to me, there's no difference between government and private industry, because at the heart of all of this is data. Data is now more valuable than oil is in the tech world. Why does Google give you everything for free? Why does Facebook give everything for free? Because what they're doing is that they're mining your data, learning all about you. Now, I used to say that they're not using it for evil. Facebook is using it for evil. Facebook, I used to, respect Mark Zuckerberg. He lived near my house. I used to say good things about him. Now now I say that he's gone from being Luke Skywalker to being Darth Vader, because Facebook has used data for evil. It's manipulating people. It caused genocide, in Myanmar. I mean, this came from the United Nations. I didn't make that up. So, but the fact is that it's all about data, 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 data. India has more data than anywhere else in the world. Nandan Nilekani has been, focused on automating the economy and really creating a digital infrastructure. I mean, his vision is amazing. I'm a big fan of Nandan's, because he really has laid the foundation to transform India using data. So all of the transactions, a lot of the infrastructure now can be built upon the technologies that he created, the vision that he had. But the fact is, India is rich in data, just like it's rich in sunlight. So when it comes to solar, India has an advantage over the rest of the world because it's drenched in sunlight. So India could be independent of, energy independent faster than Sweden can or Norway can, because sunlight, sunlight, sunlight. When it comes to data, there's so much data over here that the country doesn't know what to do with it. And what do you do with data? You mine it using AI. AI does pattern recognition, lets you build more efficient systems. So just like private industry can use data to build more efficient systems, government can be doing the same. And it's a matter of now, adapt. I'll give you some examples during our conversation of how we can do it. But the fact is, it's a matter of now understanding the power of these technologies and then improving government processes the same way that private industry would do it. What's more, I would go one step further. Chris Gopalan Krishnan also is someone I immensely respect. I mean, I look up to him because what he's done is that he's now going and applying the lessons he learned from Infosys to the startup world. So he's fostering startups. He's coaching them. He's motivating them to think bigger. But again, what you can now do is work with those startups. I mean, so the government can't do everything on its own. But there's startups in every part of India, in every district. There are all sorts of startups looking for problems to solve. So what the government, the IAS officers have to do is to realize that they have to look at the problems of each of their districts, saying, okay, look, we have bad roads over here. We have, water doesn't work properly over here. We have crime over here, whatever it might be. Start thinking about what technologies can be used that can solve the problem, and get the entrepreneurs involved, motivate the entrepreneurs to build solutions for them. And instantly you could transform India. It can come from ground up. It doesn't have to come from top down. You have top down stuff. I mean, I'm also a big fan of Amitabh Kant and Niti Aayog. He's thinking top down. He's thinking big. He's talking about, building $100 billion businesses, which is good. So you need people like him doing what Niti Aayog is doing. And then you need people, the IS officers, and you need, basically the government officials now realizing that they have opportunities to transform the services they offer to the public using technology, and then engaging the entrepreneurs to do it. They can't do it themselves. And the worst thing they could do is to go to the IT companies, because the IT companies are used to charging big bucks to Western companies and ripping them off, okay? That's what the IT industry does. forget it, leave them out of it. Go to the startups, go to the entrepreneurs, and get them building apps because they'll do it for hundredth of the cost that an Infosys or TCS or Tech Mahindra will do it, and they'll provide innovative solutions. And what you're now going to be doing is creating the seeds to create billion-dollar companies in each district of India.
Great.
So sorry, CP and Chris and all all of my friends who are in the IT industry.
No, I couldn't agree more. And let me pick up on a couple of the points you mentioned. You spoke about data. And as I mentioned, Nandan gave India Aadhaar. And after that, he's now working on account aggregators and a whole bunch of other things. Sharad Sharma and along with Nandan have developed through the iSpirit, a whole bunch of the India stacks, which are, the problem in India is unique because we appear to be okay with any large private company having our data. Now, if you go to any large bank, you go to HDFC Bank, you go to ICICI Bank, I've visited their command centers, and they have all kinds of data on you, which they collect both voluntarily asking you and a lot of data which they pick up using intelligence. We are perfectly okay with that. The problem comes when your own elected government collects data on you. And Nandan faced this challenge with Aadhaar when it started off the whole privacy debate. And then anything that government tries to do, there is always a suspicion that this is Big Brother watching. So when you spoke of India being the repository of the largest data, mine in the world, in that sense, along with China, who should be the repository of this data? Should it be government or should it be private sector? And how should this data be used? That's one part of the question. The second part is, can individual citizens whose data is being used, can, with their consent, that data be monetized and they get a share of it? See, if your data and my data is being used, why won't, and Facebook makes, say, $100 on using that data in a month, why can't the person whose data is being used be given $20 back? Is that, and people might agree, because in India, the concept of privacy is culturally alien to us. It's more a concept which is in the US. We'd be happy to part with our data. We'll be happy to even get our neighbor's data if you pay him $20.
Yeah. All I can say is that Indians are fools, but so are the Americans. Until 3 or 4 years ago, they were also fooled by the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. Over the last few years, they realized what damage has happened to them because of the tech industry being out of control. So in the last 2 or 3 years, I would call Americans fools also. I mean, in fact, they're bigger fools because, even the most educated people over there should have known better than to let the tech industry, get out of control, but they did it. And now they have a crisis there, and not even the government can rein in the tech industry. That's how powerful the tech industry has become. So,
is that really true?
Yes, it's really true.
Even the Biden administration, which is supposed to be anti-big tech.
I mean, I respect, President Biden. I respect Kamala Harris, but if you look at Kamala Harris, and I've been, at dinners with her. She's part of the tech industry. She comes from the tech industry, and the way it works in India, you have corruption. You have bags of money in suitcases chasing hands. Okay, in India they call it lobbying. It's done legally. In America, it's called lobbying. It's done above board and legally. And then there's scandals that break out when the money was used to buy prostitutes or something like that. Now you've got these politicians who are basically. Let me change the topic. Okay, so they're doing bad things over there as well. I mean,
no, of course there are. In fact, I was just telling you, Amazon today has more lobbyists in Washington, D.C. than the number of senators. So they have every senator covered with more than one lobbyist.
And then they give money, under the table, over the table, whatever. And the bottom line is that the tech industry is far too powerful. It has far too much money, and I'm not sure that even the Biden administration will be able to rein it in.
Okay, so let's come back to
GDPR. It was the Europeans who came up with some novel laws, and now the Indian government may actually have better data laws than. I'd love for America to have the data laws that India is talking about implementing. That the government has actually been bold, probably because it doesn't, have lobbyists here, bribing them the way they do in America.
So let's come back to the question of data.
Right.
Who do you think in India should own the data of citizens?
The people, just like you said, people should own the data. And this is why you need to have anonymity. You need to be able to protect it using zero-proof blockchains. There are a lot of techniques for protecting data, which can be implemented. right?
But the trustee for the data should be government or the private
The
sector?
people. I mean, in fact, if I had my way, I would advise the government to pass a law which basically says that people own their data. Or
They
start with
do.
the,
That law is already in parliament.
it's not, yeah, well,
But when it comes to day-to-day utilization of data,
you
should it,
license the data, all right? You have the right to tell the government how it can use it. You have the right to tell private industry how it can use it. And if they wanted, they license it from you.
but
Right.
Vivek, the difference is here, vast majority of our people are illiterate.
They're
And
becoming,
they
yeah, I
wouldn't
tell you,
know.
these people are more literate than you give them credit for, because I've seen how, people are using WhatsApp and they're using apps, and it's sort of incredible that you have illiterate people now using technology in a more sophisticated way than people in America do. So I wouldn't, just say that they haven't, gone to school, therefore they're not smart. They're pretty savvy. If we were able to develop, maybe we need to have Nandan and his team figuring this out and developing a system by which the consumer, by which the individual owns their data and they license it. There are all sorts of proposals that have been made for this, all sorts of designs for systems like this. India should probably leap forward and implement that, by which you own your data and you decide who you're going to license it to and how. That's the basic principle of this.
Let's come back to you mentioned about Facebook and other companies in some ways being evil.
Right.
But it's not such a clear black and white thing. There's also Facebook does bring a lot of benefits to people. So does Google. And they do take your data and monetize it. Just as Google Maps, Google Maps we can't imagine a world without Google Maps today. Likewise, the same Google Maps is used by terrorists to plant bombs. Yeah. So what is the appropriate middle path where you have the Facebooks and the Googles of the world out there providing the benefits that they do without, and probably mitigating. I don't think we can ever do away with the bad effects of it. But is there any way we can?
Yeah, we need clear regulations stipulating what they can and can't do, how they can use the data, what data can be exported. So the Indian government has been dabbling with it. Some of the policies are very, very good. Some of them don't go far enough. So India needs to be bold and just say, we're going to do it here, whether you like it or don't like it. WhatsApp is a big threat. I mean, the government made a big mistake by allowing Zuckerberg to have a financial platform on top of WhatsApp. Because not only now does he have data about everyone and their contacts and who they're doing and what they're talking about and all the videos, and he's basically spying on Indians in the in the worst way possible. Now he's going to know about every financial transaction that's happening here. Big mistake by the government. I don't know who he bribed to get that law passed, but that was a disaster area for India.
No, but let me push back a little. I don't think. Look at Paytm. All the data of Indians, the financial data, much before WhatsApp came on the scene, is today with Paytm, and Paytm is owned effectively by the Chinese. When they are asked by law in China,
right,
if Paytm is asked to hand over the data, he's not going to talk about democracy. Vijay Shekhar Sharma will take our data and give it to them because it is as per their law.
Actually, no. I mean, his data is in India. Chinese government has no way to access that. I've got to defend Vijay over here because even though China may have made an investment in the company, the data is still being stored over here. If he has Chinese employees, then by the Chinese laws, they're required to do what the government says. But simple way, it's the same thing with Zoom. I mean, I actually went on NDTV and said that Zoom should be banned. And then Eric Yuan, the CEO of Zoom basically had his team contact me. They walked me through step by step of what they're doing, how they're basically protecting themselves from China, how they're winding down a lot of the Chinese operations and moving to the United States, because he's in the same predicament that Vijay Shekhar Sharma is, that in the old days, it was okay to take money from China and be part of it. Now it's become a liability because the Chinese government has turned evil. They've really shown us that, the wolf warrior has shown us what they really are over here, is this ugly, cruel, corrupt regime, which is out to build more power. So that only happened in the last year or two. So Paytm can be disconnected from China, and you can have laws here which say that if Vijay lets 1 ounce of data get to China, he goes to jail. Trust me, he and his family don't want it.
How do we know the data isn't already gone? They've
Well,
been owning
this is why
Paytm for years now.
well, this is why you need to audit it. You need to basically have laws and check and balance because you can do that. I mean, India has enough cybersecurity specialists that they can go and check up on the company. And if they find, and what I would do is I would tell him right now and his employees right now that if any data is leaving this country, you're going to go to jail. None of it, and his employees, if the China's data is going to China, his employees know it. They're not going to want to go to jail. It's that simple. To basically, because once it becomes personal, no one cares about China or governments or anything like that. So that problem can be fixed, right? The WhatsApp is a different problem because then now asking every Indian to confirm that, hey, it's okay for us to take your data and rob you blind. They're asking, demanding every Indian, say yes to them so they cover their butt. That's a different problem.
Okay. You mentioned about Tesla. You'd be happy to know that Karnataka has, after a lot of effort, the government of Karnataka has managed to get Tesla to establish its office here.
Right.
And their first store is probably going to open in Bangalore very soon, which has been a big win for the government of Karnataka after considerable amount of effort because a lot of other states were trying. Now, the question you mentioned, you own a Tesla, I know that, and you know Elon as well. The question I had was, do you really see, in India, we don't have a dominant traffic unit. You have animals on the road, you have hordes of people on the road, our crossings are not well marked. Do you actually see a scenario in the next 10 years where autonomous vehicles, not Tesla, I mean, not manned Tesla electric vehicles, but autonomous electric vehicles will be on the roads in India? Do you see that happening?
I've often said that in India, you have to believe in God because only God can make this country work, right? The roads are a nightmare. I don't know how anyone can drive over here. So there are big challenges over here.
Because if a Tesla hits a cow, the problem is not of the cow, it's the problem is of Tesla.
I know. So I don't think Elon is going to crack that nut. I mean, it's good that he's coming here because my advice to entrepreneurs here is to take the Teslas apart and re-engineer it and build your own Tesla here. Copy, steal, or just the way the Chinese do. And build your own self-driving technologies because the Indians will figure it out because there's no way that Elon's development team is going to be able to look into whether a monkey will drop from the tree on top of the car or whether there's going to be an elephant walking out there, whereas local entrepreneurs can. And there's a lot of the self-driving software is open source right now. So I've seen enough about Indian entrepreneurs to know that they'll figure it out. And it may well start with only on the highways, so that this is the way my Tesla works right now. When you get off the highway, when you get off one of the main roads, then it goes into gets off autopilot. So you may have to have a hybrid there. In some neighborhoods, they may be safe enough that you can let the car go itself. Yeah. And other places, there's no way that any self-driving car will work on some of the roads in India, but that may be good enough.
I was reading that Waymo, in the year of the pandemic alone, has simulated 15 billion miles.
Right.
So what do you think that's enough to simulate the Indian traffic conditions?
No.
They're going to do it all over again?
This is why you need to have Indian entrepreneurs doing it. And again, a lot of the core technologies for this are open source, including Baidu. Apparently, they're open sourcing their stuff. So take Baidu's open source stuff, take out the spyware from it, which uploads to the Chinese government servers, and then see if you can improve on it and build something unique to India. This is the job for entrepreneurs.
In your book, you mentioned a very interesting example of Addison Lee, how they started the car service with an SMS first, but they never could scale up the way Uber did.
Right.
And today Uber is taking over everything. You order your food, it comes through Uber. They're taking over trucks. And soon you're going to have Uber aerial ride share, which they've sold it to another company. So what do you think Uber got right, which Addison Lee, despite being the inventor in that sense of SMS-based car service, could not do?
Addison Lee was a British company. They were trying to do things the slow British way. What did Uber do? Well, they did what Silicon Valley does. They stole the ideas, they stole the technology, and then they adapted it to local needs. And then they had lots of money from investors, and they basically this is the Silicon Valley way, that they just keep pouring money into ideas until they get them working. So they iterated a number of times. They failed many times, as did Tesla, until they got it right. But that's what it takes. And now they've become so powerful that they're trying to conquer the world. So this is why India needs to foster its own companies, shut out the foreign companies, and then allow its entrepreneurs to build their own Ubers that go and challenge the other Ubers in their home turf. India has to protect its. This is a role for government. Don't buy the BS that the US is telling you, saying, yeah, you have to have open patents, you have to follow our laws. Nonsense. Shut it off. Learn from China. China shut off the foreign companies, and it built its own innovative ecosystems. It built companies that are equal in value to Silicon Valley's companies. India needs to do the same. Shut out Amazon. You don't need Amazon in India. You don't need to have Uber in India. Create all the roadblocks of these foreign companies and give your startups a local advantage.
That's very provocative, Vivek. You
Yeah.
think today after...
And sadly, this is going on YouTube. It's going to get me a lot of trouble.
No, but do you think, given that they're already here, all of us order through Amazon.
China, what did China do? China let the US companies in, and they went in like lapdogs, like Tesla has done. I copied you on a message which I sent to Elon, in which I warned him that China is going to eat him for lunch, right? Yeah. So what did they do? They let the foreign American companies in, who went in and, rah, 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 we're going to be successful over here, smiley faces, while China robbed them blind. And then China shut them off. It created obstacles for Uber. Uber went bankrupt in China, sold everything they had, exited from there. So fine, India's let these companies in, learn all you can from them, steal everything you can from them, and then throw them out. What's wrong with that?
You're actually advocating bringing them in, ripping them off, and throwing them out.
That's what China did.
Should we do that too?
Why not? Why not?
No, but
they're money-making enterprises. Amazon, I liken to the East India Company. It really has become a dominant force, as is Facebook. These people are not coming here out of benevolence. They're not coming to uplift India or to help India's poor or entrepreneurs. They're coming here to make big profits and to conquer the country. This is how the British, the East India Company came here. And we had people asking the same questions, saying, oh, no, we have to be nice to them. They're, whatever. I mean, and the same, excuses you had for not closing the doors on foreign companies.
But okay, let's take one example. India has recently come out with a social media platform called Koo. Now, if you see the Twitter, their books are on the net. Twitter spent last year, I think, about 670 million on R&D. Koo cannot spend more than probably $1 million or $2 million on its R&D. Right. Now, how do you, when it's already they are in here, there are millions of Indians using it, also productively using it, right, quite apart from the addiction and the other thing, but they are productively using it. How do you expect a nascent, a startup like, say, a Koo or anyone else in each of these spaces to compete or take over?
This is where the magic happens. That Koo was able to replicate Twitter, 80% of its features for practically nothing, for $1 million R&D budget, okay? Because there's no magic in Twitter. It's a copy of other things, and there's nothing special about it. So so now I logged on to Koo. I created an account there, and it was just so right-wing, stuff that I got tired of it. And this afternoon, I uninstalled my Koo app because it was too much. The problem is that you don't have India's entrepreneurs who've gone on it. If I had gone on it and Indian entrepreneurs, I would have happily started using Koo. So what they did was, the mistake they made was that they didn't broaden their market reach fast enough. So maybe it's not too late. They can still do that.
Yeah, they've just started.
They just started, but the fact that people like me were ready to try it out, that's a missed opportunity for them. They should have, and I got it. I mean, Mohandas Pai introduced me to this to the CEO who he had invested in, and Apramaya.
Apramaya, that's right.
Yeah. He should have seen the opportunity to get people like me on the platform and broaden his. He hasn't done that yet. So this is a deficiency of Indian entrepreneurs, that they're not thinking big enough. All he's trying to do is to replicate the features and functions without having the grand vision. This is why entrepreneurs here have to have a grand vision and believe they can change the world. There's no reason why you can't have a social media platform here upending Twitter and Facebook and building much better local solutions.
Actually, we do have, at least when you see some company like Facebook, we have Daily Hunt, which has just turned unicorn and is pushing back against Facebook, has probably more number of daily and monthly active users in India than Facebook does. So that's one example.
I didn't know about that platform.
Yeah, Daily Hunt, which started off initially with Chinese investments, right, which is now almost gone away. And they are backed by some of the best venture capitalists in the world.
Then let's restrict Facebook.
Sequoia and others.
Smart thing for the government would be now to demand that Facebook provides data portability, so that they now have to allow you to carry all your friends and all your postings over to any platform. They make it a regulation on Facebook, and then platforms such as that simply suck out the data from Facebook, put it there, and they provide portability for the entire social media base to a domestic platform. That's the Chinese way of doing things, that you start creating hurdle after hurdle after hurdle until you suck the life out of the Western company. India should learn from that.
Right. No, actually, the big problem India is facing right now is with WhatsApp. And WhatsApp India has, said that
It's a
we
big
need
threat to India. I mean, I tell you, this is colonialism 101. India is good at bringing in. This is after seeing what's happening with WhatsApp, I wrote several articles about it. Before anyone else started complaining about WhatsApp, go and read Economic Times, read Hindustan Times. I was ripping into WhatsApp in the Indian media, warning India not to do it. Yet India is more, dependent on WhatsApp than ever. Facebook could easily threaten to shut off WhatsApp. They did this in Australia, right? And so here's the way it will play out: that the Modi administration decides that they want Facebook to do something. It doesn't do it, and then Facebook shuts off WhatsApp for a day, and the entire Indian economy collapses because WhatsApp has been shut off. That's a very likely scenario. That's how much power Facebook and WhatsApp have had. And you're not thinking about it. I mean, this is a threat to national security. WhatsApp is a threat to Indian national security. Why isn't the Indian government doing something about it? It should create its own WhatsApp. It's very easy to do it. A couple of $1 million, and you could replicate WhatsApp feature for feature. And what you should do is start pushing Indians to go on that. Tell Mukesh Ambani on Jio, this Indian WhatsApp, Jio Meet are pre-installed, and everyone is encouraged to use it. Get Indian leaders, get Indian businesses off WhatsApp, off Facebook, onto the Indian platforms.
Right. So you've spoken in your book about space,
right,
and about SpaceX in particular, which has done something remarkable, that they've brought back, they've actually created the reusable rocket and have brought back significant parts of the rocket which can be reused. Now, India's ISRO is known to be the cheapest producer of space technology. Right. We've been sending up spaceships, satellites, which the Prime Minister famously said cost cheaper than the making of the movie Avatar. So where do you see companies in sectors like space, where India already has a fairly well-developed system, come in? Because for the first time, and the reason I'm asking you this, because you've written about it in your book, and for the first time, this government by Narendra Modi has opened up space for the private sector. It just happened 6 months back. Right. And the expectation is a lot of Indian entrepreneurs will come into the space sector. We are somewhere, I wrote in an article in Financial Express recently, that we are, when it comes to space, where the IT industry was about 30 years ago. In say 91, 92, when we had Infosys and TCS developed. Space appears to be at a similar cusp today. So do you advocate the foreign majors coming in, or Indian companies developing this, or both?
You don't need the foreign majors. You can do it for 1/10 of the cost here in India. But the trouble is that space is too big a problem to solve. And I mean, what are you going to do? Go and mine the moon or mine some asteroids? Let the Indians, let the Americans and the Chinese do it. Building the rockets is good because you can now build a cheaper alternative to Elon Musk's thing. So beat Elon Musk at his own game. So there's an opportunity over there, and you can build core technologies which are applicable to industry. But frankly, it's like basic science research. India doesn't need to do it. I mean, focus on the more practical things, which can be done.
Vivek, I hate to push back. The only reason I'm doing so is even 75 years after independence, we hardly have even one global product to talk about, which is why I think we keep going back to the Facebooks and the WhatsApps of the world. And while our entrepreneurs have done great things, we've got some very exciting companies in that space, Paytm probably being one of them.
But this is again the government's fault, that it hasn't learned from China. It hasn't shut the doors. What China did was that it shut the doors to these foreign companies. As I said, they let them in, they stole everything they could from them, and shut the doors. And now they have companies that are eating Silicon Valley's lunch. So if India was smart enough to do that, rather than bowing down to Jeff Bezos, bowing down to Mark Zuckerberg, and saying we have to have an open economy, blah blah blah.
The political systems are very different. They could do it in China. Here you have a very active judiciary.
No, time out. The government is the master of regulations and roadblocks.
They go to court.
Right.
Suppose they go to court here. Our courts are extremely proactive.
Our politicians are very smart. They can figure out how to create the roadblocks to keep the East India companies out.
Okay. Okay, let's move to government. I'd love to, have you talk about where technology, maybe with some specific examples, can impact the working of government, and how do you see, in particular, exponential technologies, the kind with AI, ML, etc., in the day-to-day functioning, which will make the life of the common man better, easier than what it is today?
So I'll make it personal. I'll talk about why I'm here in Bangalore today, right? I lost my wife to cancer 18 months ago. It was devastating for me because she was everything to me. She was my soulmate. And I became determined to cure cancer because, what she said to me was that because I had asked about sharing her genome, she says, Vivek, if my suffering makes it worthwhile, then it was worth it. Those words still haunt me. That the only way I can, deal with her loss is to now cure cancer. So with the scientists who tried to help me save her, I put together a grand plan to cure cancer. Because what will it take to cure? I talked about exponential technologies. Uh, it's all about data, 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 data. Curing disease is about data. Because if you think about it, disease, there are only about 7,000 diseases in the world. There are only a few hundred symptoms. And if you put them together as a data map, it's a simple problem to solve. If you can now start looking at the correlations and say, this is a problem for AI. Pattern recognition, which is what AI is, it's a data problem. Curing cancer is a data problem. So I put together a grand plan in which I had proposed the largest clinical trial in world history being run somewhere in the world, and open sourcing all the data, genetically sequencing everyone. So first I thought that we should do this in the United States, but then I realized that the United States system is so entrenched, so close that there's no way you could do it there. China, well, China is so corrupt, so evil that even if you did something there, the government would shut it down and steal everything in sight. India was a logical choice. So, then I started researching the Indian medical research system and realized it's nowhere. Yeah, yes, you have some scientists doing some amazing work, but by and large, India is nowhere in cancer research. So I went to meet Narendra Modi in Kevadia in October 2019. I presented him with a grand plan. I basically said, if you run this project, I believe that within 5-7 years, we can cure cancer because they'll have all the data, the biospecimens, will have the research capabilities built in India to do this thing. And Modi was really excited. I mean, I was amazed how smart he was because, I had heard stories about, when I told people I'm going to meet Modi, they said, he's an illiterate. That's literally what some Americans said to me. And what will he understand? I tell you, they couldn't be more wrong because I've met world leaders. I've spent time with leaders from all across the world. Modi was the smartest of thought. He immediately got it. He says, I was speaking in English, he was speaking in Hindi. He says, तो ये जो genetic sequencing आप बोल रहे हो, इसके साथ sickle cell anemia भी cure कर सकते हैं. And I said, oh my God, he's dead right. Curing other types of disease, even in sickle cell anemia, is a data problem. So he was challenging me in that half hour I spent with him. So basically, Modi promised to support the project and do whatever we wanted to do. So now we have private industry. We have Venkat Ramachandran and some amazing scientists who are now launching the largest clinical trial in world history. It's not a clinical trial. It's actually a project to transform India's cancer care system, which is going to gather all the data and the biospecimens necessary to be able to cure cancer in the next few years. So India is going to, if everything goes right, India within the next 5 years is going to have the foundation of an industry that's larger than India's IT industry in medical research. That's possible, right? So another thing I'm involved with is a company here in Bangalore called HealthCube. What's HealthCube? HealthCube is a device that does the same tests as you do in hospitals. Now, what did the HealthCube people do? They looked at the most advanced medical devices and they copied them. They built a platform for integrating the common sensors and common scanners that are available there. They did it exactly what I advocate you need to do. So they built a platform. It's a small device. The new version of it is the size of an Apple TV. And it does the same tests as everything from EKGs to blood tests, blood glucose, blood sugar, you name it, it does. Okay, so that's HealthCube. So when I came here in October, I also asked for a meeting with the Dalai Lama because my wife was a big fan of Dalai Lama. I went to the Dalai Lama to seek his blessings for my wife. So when I was there with him, I was there for 2.5 hours watching him. He has an audience with 300 people every day. So I was by his side listening to him, and I learned that one of the big problems that the Tibetans are having is that they have diseases that they don't understand, that they came from a freezing climate to India, and suddenly they're getting sick over here. So I donated, when I met His Holiness, I said, Your Holiness, I came here to seek your blessings. I came here to take something from you. Instead, I want to give you something. I want to offer health screening for your entire population. So I donated health screening for the entire Tibetan Indian population. Now, COVID happened soon afterwards, and they could only do a few thousand people, but we analyzed the data, and we learned what was wrong, that they were anemic, they were hypertensive. We learned the problems that the Tibetan population has, and now we can treat it. So you talk about government. Well, every district, every region could be doing similar things. So these tests cost nothing. You're talking about 10, 20, 50 rupees, 100 rupees for doing the most advanced tests, and it's all on a central database. And the way we did the Tibetan analysis was we simply used simple AI algorithms, very simple AI algorithms, analyze the data patterns, and we figure out what's wrong with them. Imagine doing that across India. So you talk about what can government do. The healthcare device, the list price of it is about $1,500. Government could get it for half as much, right? And then you essentially are doing tests for practically nothing. Every district of India now, you go and you start testing the entire population. Mrs. Rajashree Birla, Idea Vodafone, they actually have launched about 100 of these projects, and they're actually testing children all across India for anemia. I think they've done 250,000 children already. And we're able to easily identify the problems and then help them. So to start with, why don't we fix the health of these people? So you basically start creating village. The model that Mrs. Birla is pushing is that you give these devices to entrepreneurs, basically high school level people. You train them up on it. It takes a few hours for them to do it, and then they go, instead of 20 rupees, they charge 40 rupees. So 4 rupees of that goes back to the company. They're paying back the loan. And then the rest of it, they keep as profit. So they've now earned a living. And now what they're doing is that they're going and testing everyone in the community and finding what diseases they have so that you have healthier, things. So you have data. So now you're region by region all across India, you know exactly what the problems are. That in this area you have anemia, in this area you have this disease, you have that disease. And so what you're doing is you're preventing disease. The government focuses on treating disease. So they want to have some fancy hospital that, some minister comes and inaugurates. Well, what if you didn't need hospitals? What if you could stop people from getting sick in the first place by offering them, health screening? That's what's possible. That's the type of thinking that, the government officers watching this have to have. That, $1,000, they can come up with the money. IS officers make enough money that they could buy it from their own pocket and then offer screening to their entire districts. That's the type of innovative thinking that these people need to do. And saying, how can we, and you don't need government approval for this. This is something you can do at the local level. And again, then you turn local entrepreneurs. So they found a problem, that they found there's anemia here, there's this disease here. Then you get the entrepreneurs to come in and start, you get the health entrepreneurs to come in and start developing nutrition solutions, developing other solutions, see what's worked in other districts, solve the problem of health yourself. You don't need to, go to the prime minister to fix the health problems or to fix the infrastructure problems of your districts. This is what technology makes possible, that the cost of a medical grade hospital level screening is down to $1,000 in India. This is made in New Delhi, made in Bangalore device being rolled out in India.
It's great, very touching of you to share a personal part of your life. And I, from personal experience, can tell you that the Prime Minister is someone whose ability to pick up intuitively the use of technology to solve very, very difficult problems is probably better than most world leaders. And I've personally seen this many, many times over. And I think it's remarkable that India has such a prime minister, despite what a lot of our mainstream media would like us to believe. Again, going back to technology and government, one thing which we've been trying to do in India at different levels of government, I had the privilege of being part of the team which started this in Andhra Pradesh with Chandrababu Naidu way back in '96, was to separate a point of decision making from the point of delivery of a service. Right. A point of decision about a service is a statutory function, which will always remain inside government. But the point of delivery can be anywhere where we can bury a piece of silicon and a piece of fiber. Now, from your experiences with technology and working with governments around the world, Where do you think we are? Many governments in India have done this. We have apps, we have portals, we have single windows. What comes next in this? Where these, for the day-to-day citizen, it's the caste certificate, the income certificate. That is what makes the difference to his life, where he doesn't have to pay a bribe.
So, Vasa, the problem here now is that you have abundance of data. You don't have the ability to analyze it. This is why I know Amitabh Kant has been going around talking about AI, and now being able to analyze it. So what each district needs to do is to turn the entrepreneurs loose, because it's a good way for them to learn how to do data analysis and get these entrepreneurs to come in and use machine learning techniques to analyze the data and advise them on how they can improve their processes.
I mean, open up the citizens' data.
Open up the data to entrepreneurs.
To startups.
What you all have to do is anonymize it. Again, if you had Nandan Nilekani and Chris Gopalakrishnan spend a couple of hours on this, they can tell you exactly how to anonymize it.
Chris has worked very closely with the government of Karnataka, as has Nandan. Chris was actually part of the vision group on IT when I was the IT secretary. Right. And we've had the privilege of having ideas from both of them. The problem comes in actually implementing it on the ground, where we have a whole bunch of both legal and administrative hurdles.
Well, this is something that the government has to fix. Allow the districts to be able to share the data anonymized. And again, you have standards for now, because you have to protect the people. You can't, because Aadhaar had flaws. The fact is that you did have leakages of data. You did have problems with it. It wasn't bulletproof. So over time, it became much stronger. Even now, it's probably not 100% bulletproof. So you have to keep improving, all right? So you have to do the same now. Take all the lessons that were learned over there, apply them to this, anonymize the data, and then turn your entrepreneurs to give them anonymized data and have them now analyze it and build systems to improve government. It has to be an industry, entrepreneurship joint venture.
Okay, before I open it up for questions, both from the live audience we have and the people here, do you have any thoughts on the bureaucracy itself? How does the Indian bureaucracy, which has several strengths, I gave you an example of how COVID was very successfully fought, how we became overnight, literally within 2 months, the mask and the PPE capital, the vaccine capital of the world now. Anything from your experiences with governments in other parts of the world from which Indian bureaucracy and IAS officers and IRS, IPS officers can learn from? Any couple of thoughts?
When I was at Kavadi, I spent a lot of time with the next generation of IAS officers. These kids were brilliant. They're as smart as my smartest students at Harvard and CMU and Duke and so on. And then you had the old babus, because you have a problem with government also, that these people are simply, drowning the public in paperwork, regulations from the British era, basically where the British, controlled India by rules and regulations and the British Raj and so on. So you've got both of those people in government. What you need to have is these young kids to kick out the old guys who are doing things the old way. Really, that's the only way you're going to have to. This is why Modi, because I asked why was he there himself. So Modi is, like I said, the guy is brilliant. He was there because he wanted to inspire these 500 recruits to come in and transform government. So this is why he spends the time with the new recruits. I mean, it literally took 2 days out of his busy schedule to be there with these recruits in Kevadia, and to inspire them to change government. So you need that next generation to come in and kick the old babus out, and to try.
Any bureaucracy in the world, I've worked in the World Bank with different, about 16, 17 countries. Any bureaucracy is hierarchical. So question of kicking out someone is anathema.
Kick the British Raj out of here. You don't need them. Let them retire. Give them early retirement. Get them out of here. Let the next generation come in.
I don't think even exponential technology can do. I don't even think that's very desirable, given that some of them bring a lot. Amitabh Kant. Amitabh is from a different era, but he's doing exceptional work.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's brilliant old babus and so on. They're not all like that. But you have a cadre of people who are stuck in the past, and everyone knows who they are.
The younger batches are supremely, far more. They see further because they're standing on the shoulders of giants. And they are brighter than the older batches, without a question.
Kick the British Raj people out, bring the next generation, and even I'm not saying that it's young or old.
I hope no chief secretary has signed in and is watching this, or anyone from Government of India, not the cabinet secretary or someone, because that could get a lot of us into trouble.
I hope I don't get deported. I mean, detained.
Yeah, you have to catch a flight out of Delhi, right?
Right.
I'm sure FRRO Delhi using artificial intelligence is watching your lip movement and is going to do a face rec on you when you cross immigration and stop you.
Right.
Okay. So we have about half an hour left, and I thought we could take some questions both from the online audience and the people here in the auditorium.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
those in the auditorium who wish to ask a question can go down to the mic out there. So just locate yourself in the first row. Meanwhile, I'll start with the online questions.
Yeah.
So there's this question which says that Wadhwa is indeed blunt, if not provocative. The question is, how can the Indian government be innovative in its laws that allows an Amazon to operate while also encouraging involuntary IPR transfer without recourse, without them coming after us?
Okay, you got to realize that there's no IPR transfer needed here. All the features of Amazon are as clear as can be. That's the thing with the technology industry. It's so easy to copy it. And this is what Amazon didn't invent most of its technologies. It copied, it stole from other companies before it. And what happens in Silicon Valley is that, this is what I said in my book, From Incremental to Exponential as well, that one of the techniques that Silicon Valley does is it tries to copy and steal. If that doesn't work, it simply buys the startups. That's why you have these big companies buying startups. Even Apple is buying startups practically every week, because if you can't copy them, you eat them, right? So that's the same thing over here. There's nothing in Amazon's IPR that you can't replicate here.
My famous comment at Harvard Business School in Clay Christensen's class was, copyright in India and China means right to copy.
Right, exactly.
But
it's the same thing.
Are you actually saying?
It's the same thing in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley excels at stealing.
No, but are you saying that India today, say a Daily Hunt or a coup, can actually copy off Facebook and Twitter without any legal issues?
Yes, exactly.
That seems very hard
That's
to
the
believe.
way, because Facebook, is stealing and copying everything as well. I mean, Facebook, is desperately trying to copy Snapchat. It's definitely Periscope. I mean, if you look at all of the features that Facebook is at, everything is copied, stolen from someone else. That's allowed.
Okay, so all the startups who are watching, Virendra Gupta, Umang Bedi, Aprameya, you should get ready and now spend a lot of time looking at the features of Facebook.
They already do.
And copy them.
These kids are smart. That's exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
And then you just copy the Chinese also, because the Chinese actually have better technology suited for India than the Americans do, because they've adapted it to the developing world. So go to China if you have to, or start downloading the apps. Get someone to help you translate the Chinese. See what's worked. See what the top most popular apps in China, and copy them. That's the.
And you're saying they are copyable. There's nothing which prevents the code from being.
No, zero. This is the way the tech industry works. So the fact that you don't even know this, you're one of the smartest people I know, right? And you have straddled both worlds. Even you don't know this. This is, this is the way the valley works. And this is what China learned from Silicon Valley and how China succeeded. Why aren't the Indians learning it?
Okay. A related question. I mean, you mentioned about interportability of our own data from one platform to the other. How can the government achieve that? So let's say if Ku wants the Twitter data of each individual to port over to Ku, how can that be achieved?
You get some intellectual property lawyers to work with you to draft some laws which stipulate that if you're going to operate a social media company here, you have to provide data portability. The Europeans have been looking into this as well, and they actually drafted legislation. So copy from the Europeans or get advice from the Europeans. It's pretty easy to come up with these laws for data portability.
So there's another comment which says FANG companies might be evil, but they are in sync with US policy globally. So in a sense, so how does India build its own gorillas in a situation where the government and Silicon Valley are hand in glove? That's the nature of the question.
Government and Silicon Valley are not hand in glove. I mean, the Indian government has been passing, laws which make Silicon Valley very uncomfortable, except they haven't been pushing too hard, probably because they don't know they can copy it. So what they have to do is they have to be smart about it and gently create regulations over the next 2 or 3 years which lock out the Silicon Valley companies. So they can be smart about it. And if they want, I can do a Zoom call with them or a Microsoft call, with Teams call with them, and advise them on how to do that.
Okay.
He knows how to get hold of me.
Okay.
Then there's another question. What role will semiconductors play in future? And does it make sense for the Indian government to focus on getting
No, it doesn't, because you don't have to build everything here. India built almost a $200 billion IT industry without knowing how to write an operating system or semiconductors, right? The value is in the layers on top of it. So this fear that India has of being left out, semiconductors is a dog-eat-dog business, because the technology keeps changing exponentially. And by the time you built, a factory, it's obsolete already. So India doesn't have to be, it doesn't even have to be building batteries or solar panels. Solar panels, maybe it's an in between, but you don't have to build all the, the core technologies. You build the layers on top of them because that's where the money is.
Okay. Then there's another question on Bitcoin and crypto. What's your views on that? Should India
Bitcoin is the greatest Ponzi scheme in the world. Right now, it's being driven by the U.S. and Chinese mafia, the tech mafia. It's India. India is doing the right thing by locking it out. Crypto is the future, but not Bitcoin, not blockchain-based crypto. What India has done with UPI and Aadhaar is absolutely brilliant, because you don't need to be logging every transaction. You don't need to have a copy of every time anyone bought a banana on the street or had some pani puri, to have that transaction being in some blockchain locked up somewhere. That's stupid. Because the simplest thing that India did was to build a method of going from a bank to a bank and SMS. So India has the most brilliant financial infrastructure in the world. It has to now simply expand it and let it win.
Then an amazing talk. So it says that is there ways by which you can ensure that 51% of foreign company is held by Indian retail investors? Is that a way to go forward?
Who cares about 51%? I mean, lock them out and let Indians copy 100%. I mean, why are we obsessed with this British Raj 51% regulation and so on? You don't need the foreign companies anymore. It used to be that intellectual property was very hard in the tech world, in the exponential. You see, I've also, if you read some of my articles, you go to wadhwa.com and read some of my articles about software patents. I've been saying that software patents should be outlawed because they don't make sense anymore. The only way you innovate now is by leapfrogging previous technology. So you don't have time to file patents or to protect IP anymore. So if IP is changing so fast in this exponential world, why do you need to to own it? You just keep leapfrogging and jumping ahead.
Okay. So Srivatsa, this is a question for you.
Okay.
He spoke about letting the entrepreneurs loose. Now, government is the owner of the biggest set of data sets in the country. And government is inherently opaque about sharing that. I mean, anonymize and share is what he's suggesting. But the government has traditionally been extremely reluctant to do this. So how do we crack this thing? Entrepreneurs can solve a lot of your problems if they have the data sets. And you guys are sitting on it.
On a lighter note, Ravi, going back to the conversation we had before we entered the hall, the minute this government wants to open up the data, the liberals in the room will say, hey, you're giving away, Modi is selling away government data. You're, mortgaging Indian citizens' data. You'd be the first to cry.
But it's anonymized. It's anonymized. So it's not individual level data. It's not available.
I think
it's meta level. Really.
I think Chris's report, Lalitesh Katragada and Chris have written this wonderful report, and they've now revised it after getting some criticism from various people. I think that's a great step forward, and that will going to lead to anonymized sharing of data. There are still, I think, issues there when it comes to government sharing data and what kind of data to be shared. I think these things are evolutionary. You can't, achieve 100%.
So you're choosing incremental over exponential.
In this case, when it comes to laws, always you take any government anywhere in the world, you take regulation of Uber. Brits have got the first time after years of court cases, they've begun to recognize Uber drivers as employees last week. So I think government policy will always be a step behind technological innovation. That's just the nature of the beast. And being in a political system, which very few people understand what a political system is. Decision making here happens through the interplay of very, very complex politics. It is not through shareholders, which makes it slower, more complex, more opaque, and also, I dare say, much more corrupt.
So we're destined to be incremental instead of exponential, which he's advocating.
When it comes to policies, yes, it will be incremental because there'll always be fine-tuning based on the exigencies of different places.
Vivek, any thoughts about how we can break that?
I don't know anything about the Indian government, and I stay away from politics and so on. So this is something I can't help you with.
You've written about politics. In your book, you've written about both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Attacking both left and right at the same time. And every time I write about, when Trump came to power, I wrote 3 or 4 articles ripping into him about his racism and so on. And that created so much controversy, so much headaches that I stopped writing about politics altogether. So
but you have no conduct rules. We are the guys who have all the conduct rules which ties our hands and our feet. You should speak openly.
So
It's
there's
easier to stay out of
another
it.
there's another comment which says to get there, the government, the Babudam needs to become a facilitator instead of their traditional role. Is that possible, and how do we get there? Where government's mindset and DNA is facilitation as opposed to being obstructionist. I think that's the
No, I think
nature of
it
the
is. You know, that change is very, very, very visible in many governments. There are, of course, cases where the bureaucracy has been designed for control. Let's not forget the mothership from which most of our laws come is the Defense of India Act 1859. So it was designed for a very different age and time. But having said so, today many of the young officers are extremely collaborative in different state governments. They take inputs, they work very closely with the private sector. And I think it is a sine qua non today that government to succeed needs the private sector to be partners in the game. And I think that's happening, that's well accepted. The suspicion of the private sector, which was there in the past, is, I think, more or less gone. It is still there in some quarters, and I must add for good reason, because there are enough number of cases of the private sector also ripping off the government. There are enough examples of that. There are well-known examples of the recent scams in ICICI Bank, in Satyam, in Jet Airways, all of which the private sector turned to government and said, please step in and help us. So that point remains, and I think there's a role for government there as well when it comes to regulation.
Vivek, you're advocating that technology can solve a lot of problems. The question that seems to hint really is saying that we may need to re-engineer our processes before we adopt the technology, as opposed to just trying to replicate what's happening using technology. Your views on that?
You don't have time to re-engineer anything here. You just have to do experiments and see what works and take risks. I mean, this is the same thing, whether it's in government, whether it's it's easy to criticize government. In all these big companies, you have the same problem. That's what that Incremental book is about, that the companies have these antibodies where they don't want to change. It's like being in the British Raj in all these big companies, where they're so defending the past. Because they succeeded in the past, they believe they're entitled to succeed in the future. The old ways supersede the new ways. This is the way big companies are, and that's why the majority of these big companies are going to become toast. They're going to go bankrupt. So you have to, do experiments and take new risks. You have to have, projects which are separated from the company. We fund them, we let them, fail a few times before they succeed. And when they show signs of success, they start pouring money into them. Government is to the same types of things. They just do the experiments, because you don't know what is and what isn't going to work.
Vivek, there's a question. You mentioned that at the district level you can do many things. Taking the Tibetan example, they said, can you give an example, an education and healthcare, something specific that can be done at the district level?
Well, in the healthcare, I gave the example of HealthCube. Right. Get a couple of health cubes in your district and test the entire population, all the common tests, and provide your own healthcare system over there. You don't need a hospital to do this thing. And then you get some entrepreneurs to come in and help you analyze the data to see how you can improve healthcare. Apply that now to other problems you have. Identify the top 5 problems you have, and then go to the local entrepreneurship community and say, look, we have these 5 problems. We want them solved. And it's an economic opportunity for you to do it. So those are the type of things that they can do at the district. You don't need permission for that, because all you're doing is tell, and it's the same thing I tell CEOs of billion-dollar companies, that I tell them, look, write down the 10 biggest problems that you have. What would double your stock price in the next 5 years or so? Give it to your employees, and then create a social media network, discussion network in which they can post their ideas. Let your employees comment on them and interact with each other. You can do that at the government level as well. Just create a local network over here. List your top 5 problems. Have the people in the district discuss them. Have the entrepreneurs now come up with ideas to solve them. And then, if the idea is good, let them encourage them to build it. Get someone to provide some seed funding, and solve the problems locally.
So essentially, get the best and the brightest to break the current model and think differently.
Exactly, and because
Srivatsa, that's what you should be doing.
The cost of doing all of this is so low now that you don't need to have government.
Well, I'll tell you one practical challenge, Vivek, which when the government of Karnataka worked with NASSCOM to set up the 10K startup warehouse, there were attempts made to bring in startups to solve complex public problems. The challenge comes and this is not true in India alone, but across the world, the process of procuring a service, be it a consultant, be it anyone, be it buying an iPhone, is an open, transparent bid with certain pre-qualifications. The pre-qualifications usually rule out the startups. You need a certain amount of pre-qualification.
This is why regulations have to be changed. This is why you have to get through and give each of your districts the ability to fund a few startups. And it's small amounts of money. You're not talking about big amounts of money. And let them solve their problems. You have to have, and the priority has to be, this has to be at the Modi level, saying that we're going to give startups an advantage over the big guys, that we will do the experiments, we'll allow some failure. This has to come from the top.
Right.
Vivek, in the era of exponential technologies and AI, we also have the challenge of having enough jobs for the population. So how do you solve that problem?
Well, in the example I gave about HealthCube, one of the places I went to, I came here really for the cancer project and for HealthCube, but I also took a week off and I went to Darjeeling, and I was at this Makbari estate. And when I was with the families over there, I saw that they needed health screening. So my proposal to the owner of that, Rudra Chatterjee, is that we essentially train up 5 people, give them the devices, and have them now become entrepreneurs who provide the testing to these people. So that's 5 jobs that can be created in one tea estate, right? So it's the same type of thinking, that by coming up with these, getting these startups to solve the local problems, you're going to have jobs being created locally, because whether it be water distribution, whether it be optimizing the food storage, whatever it might be, every time you create a new startup, you're going to be creating jobs.
One question from me, Vivek. You spoke about vertical agriculture and also about the solar revolution which is happening and the batteries revolution. Now, much of the lithium is controlled by just a few countries. And in the countries in Africa, it's controlled within that by a few corrupt generals.
Right.
And China seems to have a headway there in access to that lithium. Now, if lithium-ion batteries are indeed the way forward, and also for making the wafers for solar manufacturing, which is all concentrated in China, isn't that a disadvantage? How do countries like India get on top of procuring raw materials like lithium required for, say, a Tesla gigafactory in Bangalore?
Well, that's something that India can't fix on its own, unless it has deposits of lithium. The American government is more worried about this than you are, because this is a strategic threat to America also. So they're working on it. But the good news here is that lithium may well become obsolete as a storage mechanism in the next 5 years or so, because there are all sorts of incredible advances.
What comes next?
There's so many different materials, so many different experiments going on. This is why I'm saying India doesn't have to invest in semiconductors or these things. Take solar panels. Perscovites is another way of storing it. So if India invested massively in solar production, it would be yesterday's news by the time they built this industry, because you have Perscovites, you have all sorts of new solar technologies in the lab, which are likely to leave the labs in the next 5 years and make everything today obsolete.
Where will that end then? Where comes a point where the country says that we will invest in this and this is going to be future-proof for 10 years?
You build the layers on top of that. Don't worry about trying to do everything yourself. You don't have to. So because you, just like with computers, when the IT industry, Bangalore wasn't built by creating semiconductors. It was built by creating solutions on top of it. The money, the opportunities in creating the solutions, putting the pieces together, because the technologies at the bottom will keep becoming obsolete. That we will have alternatives to lithium, we'll have alternatives to cobalt, we'll have alternatives to silicon in solar panels in the next few years, because just Google it, look at it. Some of those experiments will work, and those will hit the mainstream and make all the existing technologies obsolete. So don't worry about being at the bottom of the stack. Build on top of the stack.
Okay, we have some questions here in the audience.
Yeah, if you can go up to the mic, please.
Can I request you to please?
Good evening. Thank you for a very thought-provoking, actually, discussion. I have one question. You were just now talking about job creation. And even I was thinking about your changes in agriculture, manufacturing, etc. These, you are saying that, okay, new jobs will be created. And I do see that. but the workforce that you have in India is to a large extent manual. And how do you see the social impact of these kind of changes in the next 10 years? Because you need a completely different educational system, you need a completely different training, and different skills would be required, where one part or a large part of the population might be left behind.
Yeah,
and what are the social implications
That's
to
a
that?
brilliant question that you've asked, because I'm not in the camp which says that it'll be okay, that we'll create new jobs which we haven't even heard of yet, therefore everything will be okay. I've written, before we started debating the jobless future, I wrote a series of 5 articles for the Washington Post in which I challenged the common notion that we're going to create more jobs. What I expect is that in the Western world, the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have massive unemployment. We're going to have massive social unrest, because you have all of these old line workers whose jobs have disappeared. Supermarket clerks, taxi drivers, truck drivers. You can go, profession after profession completely being wiped out. Now, India's advantage and disadvantage is that it's sadly lacking in infrastructure. You have to rebuild entire cities over here, right? So if you now imagine if you could 3D print buildings. So now the 3D printing automates it, but still for 3D printing, you have to be able to set up the 3D printers. You've got to build the 3D printers. You've got to now create, dig up the land and so on. So India will have an opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years to start building entirely new cities, because I'm not sure. I mean, Bangalore is a more cleaner city than many other cities are, but if you look at parts of Delhi, complete disaster area. Other cities here, abandon them and go to nicer places and create entirely new cities which are 3D printed, clean energy, rethought, built for the future. So those are the type of thinking that the Indian government will take 5 or 10 years for them to figure this out. But by that time, the technology would have caught up with them, and it can start putting in place grand plans, not only to create employment, but to now start cleaning up the environment and to be building cities of the future. Because it's, again, the good and the bad is that it's so horrible here that you can't save entire cities here. There's such crumbling infrastructure. You might as well build anew.
You had a question.
Yeah, thank you so much for the many thought-provoking discussions. My question is a little bit on similar lines. What do you think about the ecological footprints that technology would bring, and a little bit on the other side of how technology really pans out? And if I'm allowed, also another question. You mentioned that the Indian laws are going to be, in respect to data protection, far exceeding or is already far exceeding the GDPR, which is like the gold standard when we're talking about data protection. Can you highlight a little bit on that and how it, how they differentiate from one another?
On the laws, I saw some draft proposals which seem to make a lot of sense. Okay, whether they make it through or not, I have no idea. I don't know Indian politics, what's going to happen with them. I hope that the Indian government gets more aggressive, not less aggressive, and it uses GDPR as a stepping stone to the next layer up, and it creates an example for the rest of the world. I don't know. My friend over here knows more about the Indian government and the politics over here than I do. Right? As far as the ecological aspects of it go, that you can look at it in many, many different ways. I talked about the fact that these cities are, destructive. I went to Varanasi last time I was here, thinking it's the holy place of the Hindus and it must be amazing and beautiful. I was disgusted to see the way the Hindus treat their most sacred river. They basically made it a toilet bowl. Okay, so I felt ashamed to be a Hindu when I went to Varanasi. Okay, so ecologically, we've created a disaster over here. So again, the good news is that we can now create new cities built where they should be, which don't have that ecological problem that the old ones do. We may have to abandon entire cities in India because they're built on the wrong foundation, on the wrong platform. If the Ganga is sacred, we shouldn't have industry next to it. We shouldn't have houses next to it. Leave it and turn it into a natural park. Leave it pristine the way it should be. That's the type of thinking that India will need to have in the next decade or so. Right now, it's too early to have those discussions because the government is basically, trying to solve the day-to-day problems, and the technologies I talked about don't exist yet. There are going to be a lot of new technologies coming about in the next decade, which will make it possible to build transformative new societies. So I would say let's just be patient for the next few years. Focus on basics like solar energy. Let's have government schemes, because again, that's going to create massive employment. When I look at the rooftops of Bangalore and New Delhi, I'm surprised at what I don't see. Solar panels, right? Why aren't they there? They're there. Why are you bleeding the grid dry when you could have all of that here? So with the right policies and with a further drop of 20, 30, 40% in the cost of solar, we could start now creating the solar panels and batteries on top of every house and get it off the grid and reduce the burden on the grid, okay? That's step one. Step two is electric vehicles. The government should basically state that 2025, we will not allow any more internal combustion engines, petroleum vehicles to be produced in India. That they will not be allowed to be imported or produced in India, 2025. Which means that now you have 3 or 4 years to build an electric industry here. And the local startups already doing there's some amazing EV startups coming about there. Suddenly they get a shot in the arm and they get a chance to build new technologies for India and for the rest of the world. So those are probably the low-hanging fruits. And then apply the technology to healthcare, apply it to a few other things, bring in robots where it makes sense. Those are the things that can be done in the next 5 years or so.
I don't know, Vivek, when you went to Varanasi, right. That's, as you know, the Prime Minister's constituency, but there has been, if you go to Assi Ghat now, there have been people report quite a significant change. I'm not saying it's all cleaned
that's
up.
what the boat, I went to one of those boats. That's
when was this? Which year?
A year ago, 18, when I came in October, I also went to Varanasi. Of 2019. Right. And they were telling me that, you think this is bad, you should have seen it, yes. 4 years ago. And I'm saying, oh my God, it was worse than this. So I was
one last question from me.
Disgusted at India and Hindus for, for what they've done to their most holy river.
One last question. Kai-Fu Lee, I've been chatting with him on AI and exponential technology. I'm sure you know
I don't buy his BS about China's ahead. The AI revolution, I wrote a piece for Hindustan Times, but just Google it and read it. The AI revolution has not even started yet. The AI we need to be able to solve the problems is still 2 or 3 years away.
No, so my question was different.
Right.
My question was, given that this is, we have a lot of officers and it's about innovating government, one of the things he says is that the jobs which are safe, he was asked the question, which are the jobs which won't be affected? Everything seems to be getting affected. There'll be some jobs which won't be affected. So his answer was those jobs which require compassion and a human element. So my question to you is, the freedom which the system gives the IAS is what gives it its power. The same freedom also enables officers to go astray. Do you think with AI and ML coming, the jobs of the bureaucrats are under any threat or not?
It depends on what the bureaucrat, like I talked about having all these old British Raj people retire. So the people who are defending the past
with no AI needed, human intervention to edit, chop off the last part.
Right. So the people who embrace the future, who are open-minded, who will use technology for good, are the ones who should keep their jobs. It's that simple.
Thank you so much, Vivek, for your time and for sharing so many personal anecdotes. We're extremely grateful. Copies of Vivek's book, signed copies, are outside. Any of you who want to buy those, they are right outside. And Vivek is, of course, here for some time to chat up with all of you. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience both here. Thank you to the IAS Association and the Bangalore International Center for hosting us. And last but not the least, Vivek, who agreed at extremely short notice to my request to come, change his schedule, change his flights to come here and speak to all of us. Thanks so much. Hopefully, India will go from incremental to exponential soon.
Thank you.